Thank you, Kolbrun. I'm also Serb. I come from Balkan, so I cry, you know, so sorry about that. They're my Balkan genes. But thank you. Thank you very much. I feel like I'm sitting here with rock stars. And I'm so inspired and thankful for the opportunity to speak at this conference with you guys. And to those of you who have traveled from abroad, welcome to this little corner of the world, a country commonly registered by outsiders as a paradise of gender equality. So we have heard Prime Minister talk about migrant women. We have heard in a speech. We keep hearing it during these 2 days. So I will also try to give you a view of how living in this paradise looks like for many women of foreign origin who call Iceland their home. So Iceland is a rather young country of immigration compared to other Nordic countries, and the ratio of immigrants in the total population is still rather low compared to, for example, Sweden. When I moved to Iceland 25 years ago, women were in majority of immigrant population. But the gender ratio has changed in recent years with the growth of, for example, the construction industry that employs mostly men. But at that time, it was really us women coming here because we married or working in fish industry and so on. So the logical step when we started organizing, when few of my friends and I founded Women in Iceland, the Women of Multicultural Ethnicity Network, the NGO founded by and for immigrant women, is to do it for women because there were no men to be found, and they were not really, we looked for them, they were not there, they were not interested. So we founded the organization back in 2003. What we wanted to do there, what we set out to do, is to unite, express, and address the interests and issues of all immigrant women in Iceland in order to bring about equality for them, both as women and as immigrants in all the areas of the society. So, we were talking about intersectionality. I probably didn't know the term then, but, that's what we were doing. At that time, Icelanders were like, oh, great, you're so good, it's nice, but, we were combating stereotypes of mail-order brides, or that foreign women were underprivileged poor souls that needed to be helped. We were combating prejudices against us were such that we even had a hard time getting immigrant women to join our organization. There were no Americans, there were no Danes, there were no, we were just, East Europe, Asia, whatever, for fear that people may think that something was wrong in their homes. And I was asked, why do you do it? I thought you were fine, Why are you doing it? But so things have changed rapidly in the past few years. And moving forward, immigrant women in Iceland are becoming a dynamic and strong voice in Icelandic society. I do believe so. Iceland is the only country in the Nordic region where women with migrant background join the conversation as a separate group in the MeToo movement. And what I think the MeToo movement did something. It brought together immigrant women in Iceland from all walks of life, backgrounds and positions in the society. Now we are whole. Now we are, everybody's there. Or, well, not everybody's always. I think that many of you or people that are in your union are unfortunately still invisible. So, but at least we look more diverse. So why did immigrant women in Iceland speak out in that way? I can't believe that we in Iceland face more hardship than our sisters in other countries do. I think that there are a number of factors that we must look at. Perhaps, Iceland is small and our immigrant population is even smaller, so maybe it's easier to connect in a smaller society where people know each other better, either virtually or in person. We also have to consider the fact that in Iceland we have a strong legacy of women's rights activism, and immigrant women have been active participants in the women's movement for the last 15 years or so. So when the first groups of women came out with their MeToo stories in Iceland, it was evident there were very few non-traditional Icelandic names on the lists and on manifestos that were to be found. So clearly, for some reason, women of foreign origin in Iceland had difficulty finding their place within those groups. So why is that? Did they feel they do not They did not belong? Did they think nobody would listen? Did they feel their stories were different? So for example, I didn't even know that these groups existed until they published, you know. So I didn't know where to join. And I'm, you know, you heard Kolbrand talking about me, you know, if I'm not adjusted and adapted here, I don't know who is. So, but then we had a lady, the first woman of foreign origins to be elected a member of Alþingi, Nicole here, Lee Mosti. She was in one of group on being a woman in politics, foreign woman in politics, so this was her door in. And she saw that. She saw the glaring lack of presence of immigrant women and founded a closed MeToo group for women of foreign descent, encouraging all of us to join and put our name to a petition. So word spread very quickly on that cold January days and nights on social media, and we started joining. In only a few days, the number of members went up to 660. And so what Nicole did greatly, and other administrators in the group, was to guarantee the privacy of the group, but also gave women the chance to share their stories in private messages or anonymously to make absolutely sure their identity would not be revealed. And this is different from the other groups. You know, Nicole was on the phone and I was, you know, listening to stories and typing them down. Now, I have been an activist, as you heard, working on immigrant and gender issues for almost 20 years here in Iceland. And as such, I'm no stranger to stories of violence and abuse, unfortunately. One of the key pillars of the activities of women in Iceland has always been combating gender-based violence against immigrant women. Because of that, I served on board of the only women's shelter in Iceland for 6 years. I have translated for and I have assisted women who had horrific stories to share. So one would think that not much should have come as a surprise to me in these stories, and I didn't really expect it. But the stories that women shared in this safe space that we created on our Facebook group were like a punch to my stomach. Really, I thought, you know, what have I been doing for all these years? You know, if I'm reading these stories now. And so they were quite different from the stories that we read in the Icelandic groups. It was like they had an additional dimension, additional layers of horror and humiliation. Stories shared by the brave women in our group were filled with prejudice, discrimination, systematic degradation, seclusion, manipulation, and abuse of the worst kind. You know, I'm still crying when I think the women said that they felt abandoned and isolated. Many were not only experiencing abuse in the workplace, they were living in abusive relationships, and when they asked they asked various authorities and institutions for help, if they even knew where to turn to, they were very often faced with distrust and unwillingness to help. So for example, one woman was told, you need to move back home, let him hit you, and then we can help you. That was the advice a police officer gave to one woman. So would the same advice be given to a native-born Icelandic woman? I don't think so. I really, really doubt it. So we know that women in abusive relationships have been subjected to threats by their partners that they will have their residence permits revoked. Then these partners use money as a way to keep immigrant women shackled to them. What we learned from the stories in our MeToo group, and honestly I was so surprised and shocked, was that employers use similar threats to keep us in check. If you do not do what you're told, you will lose your job, you will lose your working permit, you will be thrown out of the country. And so these stories showed not only harassment and abuse, but also discrimination and blatant racism shown not only by individuals, but also by official institutions that one would think were there to protect all citizens of this country. Other women shared stories about the lack of support. Many of us immigrant women lack a support network which most native-born can rely on. So what struck me also was that the native-born people in Iceland, our neighbors and colleagues, were less willing to step in and reach out to us. It was as if they felt too insecure, almost shy to interfere with someone outside of their family circle, even if it was to help. So bearing in mind the exposure to such threats and violence, the risk of losing the livelihood and the residency right, as well as the fact that Iceland is a small place and the immigrant community is even smaller, it is really a testament to the bravery of women that we managed to collect around 30 stories to publish, and that 97 women out of the 660 group of participants agreed to sign the petition. But this also means that over 85% of the women in the group did not feel safe enough to sign their names to a petition, while in other groups, the ratio was around 50%. So many other MeToo groups paved the way by the time we stepped forward. And I find it honestly unlikely that we would have done so if it had not been for the other groups. And I also think it is good because that we were not first to share our stories, because as then the problem could have been brushed off as something that happens mostly to foreign women. Thus compartmentalizing the issue of gender-based violence as something that happens to others, to underdogs, not to us. So by having native-born Icelandic groups come out first, we clearly sent the message that the gender-based violence immigrant women are subjected to is not their problem. It is a problem of the society. Gender-based violence will not be eradicated by sending every immigrant out of this country. So, have to hurry up. Iceland is indeed promoted all over the world as paradise of gender equality. Many of us decided to move here because we heard these stories. We want to live in the country, where you live good. We want to be treated equally. We want to live and raise our children in such a paradise. Yet the MeToo stories show that, it's disappointing. Really. We still have a long way to go. So I'm thinking, going forward, what do we need to do? So I think, first of all, we need a paradigm shift. I have been fighting to change the conversation about immigrants since I moved to Iceland, to make Icelandic society understand that immigrants are not outsiders, they are an integral part of the society we are creating together. I cannot repeat it often enough. There's nothing wrong with being an immigrant or of foreign origin, and it's nothing to be ashamed of. We need to stop looking at people of foreign origin as a deviation from default Icelander, whatever that means. We need to stop measuring value of immigrants in how close they manage to imitate the default Icelander, whether by appearance, name, accent, when speaking Icelandic, religious beliefs, and cultural background. Some of us are never going to make it, So we need to positively appraise the enormous contribution immigrants have made and do make in our society. We need to assert immigrants' rights on our own terms and to show the way for our daughters and sons, just as the Icelandic Red Stockings, suffragettes, and other brave pioneers have shown generations of girls and boys in this country. Secondly, every government plan of action to eradicate gender-based discrimination, harassment, and abuse must take into account the needs of immigrant women, not as defined by outdated Icelandic experiences and reports written at a time when immigration was almost non-existent. This needs to change. We need to stop looking at immigrants in the labor market as a resource, endless resource, whose main purpose for being in Iceland is to drive the country's economic growth. As it stands now, the labor market is becoming more and more segregated. I mean, how many, you're more than half of your 50% of union members of Iceland are foreign. They're occupying, immigrant workers are occupying majority of certain sectors, such as tourism, cleaning, the fish processing industry. So it is unacceptable that we have mostly been unable to reach young people who move to Iceland to work for a limited time here. If their rights are jeopardized or they experience abuse, chances are that they will leave or be sent out of the country before they see the justice, and someone else will take their place, and thus the vicious circle continues. Yesterday, we heard the results of the report Ministry of Welfare commissioned on the harassment in the workplace. We also heard that according to that report, immigrants are less likely to be affected by harassment for a number of reasons. Well, it came as a surprise, really. So the study interviewed a very small number of people of foreign origin who have lived here at least 5 years or more. I doubt that it shows the reality of immigrants who work, for example, in precarious jobs and big and important industry sectors such as tourism. We shouldn't be making policies based on reports that do not address adequately the situation of the most vulnerable parts of the population. It is the responsibility of all the actors of the labor market, not individual workers, both the labor unions and the Federation of Employers, to ensure equal rights and the eradication of discrimination of all workers in the society. And lastly, we need to drastically expand representation. Immigrant women need to be seen and heard in all spheres in society. This is not only to show how diverse we are, nor in order to fulfill quotas or be some token women, but because we immigrant women have views and opinions and can provide insights that enrich the conversation and benefit the whole of society in Iceland. And on a more personal note, I was, as Kolbrun said, elected chair of candidate in the Félag Íslands, the Women's Rights Association, the first woman of foreign origin to serve in that capacity in the long history of the organization. I'm really, really humbled and thankful by the trust and positive responses I received. I haven't received anything negative. But the mere fact that this election made the news shows us that true equality has not been achieved. We will only be able to say that the equality has been reached when this is not newsworthy anymore. Thank you.